Virtually all over for rebel-held East Aleppo, but as Assad and Russia reject a UN evacuation, what will happen to the tens of thousands of people there, especially the children? Tonight, a desperate plea from the ruins.
Really, it's very bad situation now. I've seen a lot of children, a lot of women. They were so afraid. Actually, I don't want to go out from the city. It's my Aleppo, it's my lovely city.
Good evening. The powerlessness of nations in the 21st century. As the new UN Secretary-General is sworn in New York, his peace envoys are stuck outside Syria, pleading for access, most immediately to rescue some 500 children, 100 doctors and nurses, and some 300 injured people from what was East Aleppo. An emergency debate tomorrow in the House of Commons calling for an immediate ceasefire and UN access is likely to fall on deaf ears.
Also on tonight's programme, ministers refused to find even a penny more for social care in the autumn statement just weeks ago. Now, amid warnings of a crisis, the government prepares to allow council tax to rise to fund it. As the outgoing US president orders a full inquiry into CIA claims that Russia hacked the election, the president-elect accuses the intelligence agencies of cooking up a conspiracy. And a neo-Nazi group which celebrated the murder of Joe Cox becomes the first far-right group to be prescribed by the government. Membership will be illegal within days.
And in the latest of our No Go Britain series, we go in search of work with disabled people. Zoe Hilton-Webb talks to some in work and others seeking work about just how hard it is to convince employers both to take them on and to retain them.
It's just that heartbreaking that you know you've done everything that you can. Your friends have got the same qualifications, if not less, for getting these top jobs, and you because of your disability, you're not getting it.
In the last few minutes, the Syrian army has said it is in the last moments before declaring victory in the battle to recapture the eastern part of Aleppo. Today, the situation has become more desperate by the hour for the remaining civilians. Activists on the ground speak of terrifying scenes as civilians trapped by Syrian soldiers on the ground try to flee. Constant bombardment from both ground and air. International efforts for a safe passage for the most vulnerable civilians have come to nothing. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said tonight that talks with America over Syria have reached a dead end. Over the past month, the regime onslaught has gradually intensified, now taking around 98% of the territory formerly held by the rebels. Overnight, the enclave halved in area as rebels withdrew from all districts on the eastern side of the Aleppo River. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, has this report.
It is all but over. In groups, family, friends, sometimes with makeshift white flags, they escape the hell of East Aleppo for government areas.
Fire is eating the building after an airstrike. This is the Lata neighborhood where everything is destroyed. This is how the regime is taking these areas.
Overnight in East Aleppo.
Everything.
The eyewitness testimony of just one remaining resident. In the final days, or hours perhaps, before all this city falls to government control.
I'm trying to take a shelter, but where to go?
From the outlying areas, Syrian army mortar batteries pound round the clock. Closer in, their troops take East Aleppo street by street.
The battle is at an end. Only 10% of eastern Aleppo remains in the rebels' hands.
The battle certainly is at an end. As of now, that figure is only 1 or 2%. Thousands of civilians from the east now streaming into government areas. They know it is all over. Some spoke to Russian TV as they emerged, angry at the rebels in the east.
Those animals can go to hell. They didn't even give the children anything to eat. I told them 4 times I wanted to leave, but they kept on insisting that I could die. In the end, I told them, well, let me die.
blaming the rebels may well be genuine. It can also help save your life. Previously, when cities like Homs or Daraya fell to the government, elaborate safe passage for rebel fighters and civilians was in place from agencies like the UN and Red Crescent. Ominously, that has not happened in Aleppo. Russian and American talks to broker a deal have not succeeded, and the numbers of people in East Aleppo are likely to be very much bigger than in previous sieges.
For now, our main priority is to access these people with the humanitarian aid, and we appeal here in the parties, in this middle of the offensive as the front lines are moving, to ensure the protection of civilians.
The UN says there are 40 doctors, 70 nurses, 300 injured, as well as 500 children they need to evacuate now. But the UN, the US, the UK and the EU, all of them utterly sidelined now by Syria and Russia. Irrelevant, impotent and humiliated.
2,215 militants have laid down their arms and withdrawn into the areas controlled by the Syrian government. In accordance with a decision made by the Syrian president, 2,137 militants are granted amnesty. Others are undergoing checks.
Undergoing checks. Well, tonight international aid organisations are concerned at the fate of hundreds of people, particularly men of fighting age, now in the hands of government forces undergoing checks. Aleppo, though, is only one front in a complex international war here. In a major blow to both the Syrian government and the coalition campaign of airstrikes, which includes the RAF, Islamic State fighters have again taken the ancient city of Palmyra.
Praise be to God for the conquest of Palmyra. We will break the campaign of the spiteful crusaders, we will reach the airport, and we will continue our campaign on into Homs.
Timing their attack while Syrian and Russian forces are preoccupied with the fall of Aleppo, this 2,000-year-old archaeological site is now again at the mercy of IS explosives. And also, a geographically strategic town is again lost to the government and their Russian allies.
Well, over the last year, Channel 4 News has broadcast the images of camerawoman Wada Al-Khatib as she's documented the plight of people trapped in rebel-held East Aleppo. Wada is married to one of the city's few remaining doctors and is the mother of a young baby. Her films have captured the horror of the violence on civilians. Today, trapped in one of the last remaining rebel-held areas, with the Assad regime on the verge of taking it back, she sent us this audio message.
Really, it's very bad situation now, and a lot of families are now in the streets. There are heavy shelling around the hospital. Its motors and air forces are flying and make attacks. So I don't know if it's okay. Last days we were hearing about a deal between the Syrian government and the rebels, between the United States and Russia, but we didn't hear anything on the ground. So we don't know what's happening now, but what we exactly know that the regime is too close from us, and that will be a big massacre if he takes our area. A lot of injuries in the last days were attacked when they were make a group to go together to government areas. I've seen a lot of children, a lot of women. They were so afraid, they were so surprised because they were talking that we were going to the regime area, why he killed us. I don't want to go out from the city. It's my Aleppo, it's my lovely city. Maybe it's just some faith in our hearts to be strong, to maybe this disaster will be finished and we will be okay.
Wahab Al-Khatib talking to us just by phone just now. Joining me now from Beirut is the award-winning journalist Rania Abu Zaid, who has reported extensively on the Syrian conflict. At Westminster, the former International Development Secretary, Andrew Mitchell, he's just secured an emergency Commons debate on Syria to take place tomorrow. And with us here in the studio is David Nott, British surgeon who's been working with medical teams to save lives of the seriously wounded in Aleppo. Rania, we're hearing harrowing scenes of what, and indeed seeing some on the ground in East Aleppo. What's the latest you're gathering?
Well, the same thing. It looks like the imminent fall of the last slivers of rebel-held Aleppo. You know, as you rightly mentioned in that report, as your reporter mentioned, that there has been no safe passage offered this time. In other deals, fighters and civilians have been offered passage to Idlib province most commonly. This time it looks like that it simply isn't on the cards. Assad is winning on the ground and he doesn't feel like he needs to make any concessions. So the people who remain in eastern Aleppo, as your camerawoman said, don't want to surrender to a government that they despise, that they don't trust, and that they fear will either kill them or disappear them into one of its many dungeons.
The problem, of course, is that we have no clear picture as to actually what does happen to each of these groups. Some, it seems, do surrender and then taken, as you say, to Idlib, but others, it seems, are then taken for checking, and then we know nothing more about them. Do we have any evidence that thereafter something positive happens?
Well, you know, there are all sorts of claims, but that's the difficulty of not being on the ground and being able to see for ourselves and to verify information. There have been all sorts of claims and counterclaims in this offensive, as there has been in the Syrian war. Now, government representatives say that they simply have to check the men who are coming out, that these were armed men or men of fighting age, and that no government on earth would just simply let them leave. Whereas, you know, as we know, the Syrian regime has a history of disappearing people into its jail cells, and often with very little evidence of what they may or may not have done, and certainly, you know, the judicial system has not. There are all sorts of human rights reports about what happens to people who end up in those prisons. It's very unnerving for the people who remain in there.
It's hard to remember that, in fact, this all started from a kind of Arab Spring. And one wonders now what the fall of east of Aleppo really means to the rebellion. It doesn't mean it's over, but it surely means that it's very badly winged.
No, definitely. I mean, you know, Aleppo was its prime real estate, and the rebellion has lost it now. Now the remaining areas that the rebels control aren't of that much strategic value in terms of the leverage that they might be able to garner in terms of any sort of political concessions from the regime. They continue to control the Aleppo countryside, the countryside around Hama and Homs, and most of Idlib province, including the provincial capital, Idlib city, which is only one of 2 of Syria's 14 provincial capitals that is not currently under Assad's control. The other one, of course, is Raqqa city in the northeast, which is the stronghold of the so-called Islamic State group. So they still control Idlib city and that province.
OK, Rania, for the moment, thank you. David Nott, your prime interest, obviously, at the moment is that community you left, that you were working with, what we think possibly 100 of doctors, nurses, auxiliaries, and of course some 500 children and a large number of wounded. I mean, what you're hearing 2 or 3 times a day, what are you hearing?
Yeah, so I mean, for the past sort of week or 10 days or so, we knew this was going to happen. So we knew we had a very small window to get people out. And of course, the thing is that the doctors, the nurses, they're all men, and they're all going to be taken by the regime. So they didn't want to go. They really didn't want to go to the regime side. They had the opportunity, but they didn't want to go. They also wanted to stay with their patients. They wanted to stay with the 300 seriously wounded patients. And we also isolated 500 children. I asked them, how many children do you have? They came back to me, 500. OK, shall we get them out? So I spent, I don't know, 10 days ago, 4 or 5 days constantly on the phone to the Assad regime, right through to the presidential palace, trying to speak to President Assad himself. I almost got through to ask for a ceasefire. The humanitarian Bob Geldof was also heavily involved in this, and we, in fact, secured a Russian ceasefire on Thursday. And they also allowed us to perhaps get the doctors, children and wounded out via the road up to north of Syria, just about Bab al-Hawa. But of course, the problem was that the Syrian regime never came back to me. They never answered any of their calls. They never responded to any of my emails or faxes, and they continued to bomb, and they bombed and bombed and bombed.
So now, Andrew Mitchell, it comes down to politics, and this is a terrible failure of the international community. And I mean, it's on a scale that we've never seen in recent decades, and we feel powerless. You're going to have a debate tomorrow, but I mean, what can the UK even begin to think about doing? Andrew Mitchell, are you hearing? I think your earpiece has possibly come out. Has it? 1, 2, 3. I'm going to try and get that sorted out and come back to you, David. I mean, in the end, you must feel as frustrated as everybody else does. Is he hearing us? No.
Well, I do. You know,
I mean, it is incredible that the UN have not been able to get into this area at all under any circumstances.
Well, we've been in contact with the UN. We've been in contact with the High Commissioner for UN in Jordan, Kevin Kenneth, and he has been very, very helpful. But he said he cannot do anything until there is a ceasefire. People have to have a ceasefire.
Andrew Mitchell, I mean, I'm sorry about that. We had a technical fault of some description. And this is an absolutely devastating moment, not just for the people of Syria, but for the world. I mean, it's quite clear the international community has failed desperately over this. And you've got a debate tomorrow in the House of Commons, but where can that take us?
Well, I mean, your analysis is entirely correct. The world promised that in these circumstances we would exercise a responsibility to protect, and the international community has utterly failed to do so. But we are where we are tonight. What has to happen, in my view, are two things. There has to be, on the ground in Aleppo, as soon as possible, international actors from the UN, humanitarian people who must be given unfettered access to the ground in the middle of East Aleppo, where this very narrow area, which was this morning about 10 kilometres by 10 kilometres, which is now rapidly closing. We must have independent, trusted United Nations humanitarian actors there on the ground to do two things, really. The first is to ensure that there isn't another Srebrenica. There's a very grave danger, as both your other two correspondents were saying, that the young men of fighting age will be taken away into an unknown future and an unknown destination. It's essential that that is stopped from happening by credible international observers. And the other thing is that the wounded, the people who David Nott has been talking to, the 70 medical staff, up to 40 doctors, the large numbers of children and those who've been wounded who will not put themselves willingly into the hands of the regime, they should be moved to the north of Aleppo in independent United Nations transport lorries and buses and got out of what is a very, very dangerous area.
But you use the phrase must have, must have, must have. We won't have, will we? Because there is a permanent member of the UN 5, the Security Council, who can veto every move that is ever made. The Russians are on the ground. You will not get your way.
Well, the Russians will be judged by what they do now if they hamper, in this very bleak and difficult setting, the work of the international humanitarian agencies, their colleagues in the United Nations. And the aim of the debate tomorrow is to ensure that the British government does everything it possibly can to advance those two objectives. The first, to ensure that there isn't a repeat of Srebrenica, and the second, to get out of the Aleppo fighting zone the very vulnerable people who David Nott was mentioning. Those are the two objectives. Britain has immense leverage at the United Nations. We too are a member of the Permanent Five with vetoing power. It's essential that we use our convening ability at the United Nations to persuade the Russians to allow this humanitarian effort to go forward.
Andrew Mitchell, Rania Abuzaid, David Nott, thank you all three very warmly for coming with us. Thank you.
Now, ministers are looking at allowing increases in council tax to pay for social care. The move comes amid warnings that the system is facing a crisis, with hundreds of care homes on the brink of financial ruin. Councils are expected to be given permission to raise an extra 2%, the equivalent of £23 on an average house. But there is scepticism that the money will be enough to cover the large cuts to council funding in recent years, or to meet the ever-rising demand of an ageing population. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, reports.
Local government spending on care has dropped nearly 10% in the last 5 years. the number of elderly people needing care goes up by about 1 million every 5 years. Some thought the government was going to act to repair the funding gap in the autumn statement just under 3 weeks ago, but it wasn't to be. Only last month, in the run-up to the autumn statement, the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, was trying to get a 2% precept allowed on council tax bills for social care. That will be on top of the 2% that's already allowed. But back then, Theresa May was having none of it. It seems as though her opposition has collapsed in the face of a collective howl of pain from the sector. How big is the crisis that's being addressed?
It's huge. I mean, we know demographic changes are having a massive impact on our society. Demand for care services is huge. I think we're in unprecedented waters. I don't think we've ever seen pressures as extreme as the sector is facing today.
Sources close to Philip Hammond privately confirmed the earlier battle with Number 10. The Chancellor told a select committee it wasn't true.
Is this true?
No, as so often, these stories are not.
Number 10 insists that extra money alone is not the cure for the problems in care. It points to vast disparities between different areas of the country in terms of how many days of hospital bed occupancy are wasted because of patients ready to leave, but there isn't care in place to look after them. They're called delayed discharge from hospital days in the jargon. In Stockton-on-Tees last year, there wasn't a single day wasted with patients hanging around unnecessarily in hospital. In Birmingham, a whopping 36,000 days were spent in hospital by patients with nowhere else to go. The problems in the care sector are being multiplied as care homes like this one in Cheshire are closing because of pressure to make ends meet. More than 250 care homes have closed since March.
There's a lot of elderly people in hospitals now. They need placement in a care home, and if they are a council customer, i.e. they don't have assets of more than over £23,000 in their banks or anything, they're a council customer, they need placement in a care home that will take council customers, and quite a few of those are closing now, like this one.
In poorer areas, a 2% precept has raised about £5 per head of population, compared with £15 per head in more prosperous areas. And that 2% precept has often got swallowed up fast.
Those authorities who have raised it, and most, by far the majority, have raised it, but a few have not. That tax levy raised about £380 million. The national living wage actually cost local authorities £600 million.
Many hospitals and care services are at a tipping point, both jealously guarding scarce resources just when they need to work together more than ever.
Well, Gary joins us now from Westminster. Gary, we saw the Chancellor talking in that select committee about social care, but he also strayed onto the thorny issue of Brexit as well, didn't he?
They very much lured him onto that terrain, and he was asked whether he was in favour of a transitional arrangement. So Britain, on leaving, doesn't just jump to a new status, but has some sort of intermediate status for a period as yet unknown. And this is a very hot potato amongst not least Conservative MPs at the moment. Hard Brexiteers aren't so keen. Hard Remainers think it might be the Holy Grail, and there's an awful lot of people in between. Well, Philip Hammond has now been extremely clear on where he stands on this whole issue. He said there is an emerging view amongst business, regulators and thoughtful politicians having a longer period to manage adjustment would be generally helpful. Now, it rather begs the question who he thinks are the thoughtless politicians, but he definitely, I suspect, is definitely including himself in the thoughtful politicians category. We'd already heard a few weeks ago from Theresa May saying she acknowledged that business were worried about a cliff edge when Britain comes out. And we've also heard recently through a leaked document that David Davis is a little bit warier, less enchanted with the whole idea of a transitional arrangement. It could well be that he's playing a game where he doesn't want to make it obvious to our negotiating partners that that's what we want, but we do now know exactly what Philip Hammond wants.
Gary, thoughtful as ever. Thank you very much. John.
Now, the row over alleged Russian interference in the US presidential elections is showing no sign of abating. Whilst Barack Obama has ordered a full investigation, a call that is backed by a bipartisan group of senators, President-elect Donald Trump has dismissed the claims as ridiculous. Porrick O'Brien reports now from Washington.
There he is. 6 weeks from now, Commander-in-Chief.
these people's new boss. Away from the annual Army-Navy showdown, the president-elect was adjusting his own gum shield and going in hard. The quarterback in his sights, though, America's entire intelligence services community. They are now confident that Russia interfered with the US election by strategically dumping hacked emails. But the CIA have gone further. The strategy wasn't just to undermine American democracy, it was to tip the balance in Donald Trump's favor. The president-elect's reaction? The intelligence services have no idea what they're talking about.
I think it's ridiculous. I think it's just another excuse. I don't believe it. And hacking is very interesting. Once they hack, if you don't catch them in the act, you're not going to catch them. They have no idea if it's Russia or China or somebody. It could be somebody sitting in a bed someplace.
He went a step further, though, implied that the intelligence services were working in cahoots with the Democrats to weaponize intelligence for political gain.
No idea.
So why would the CIA put out the story that the Russians wanted you to
win?
I'm
not sure they put it out. I think the Democrats are putting it out because they suffered one of the greatest defeats in the history of politics in this country.
The president-elect then, when it comes to intelligence, is positioning himself as arbiter-in-chief. In other words, if he doesn't like the intelligence, well, it's just not that intelligent. Also over the weekend, Trump rejecting the need for a daily security briefing.
I don't have to be told, you know, I'm like a smart person. I don't have to be told the same thing and the same words every single day. Every day, every morning, same words. Sir, nothing has changed. Let's go over it again. I don't need that.
The big question, though, if the CIA analysis turns out to be true, why would the Russians want Trump in the White House? The Democrats in little doubt.
Trump was such a pro-Putin, pro-Russia candidate, willing to consider doing away with sanctions, belittling NATO, admiring a Putin, claiming that the Russians were only bombing ISIS in Syria when they've been bombing civilians. You'd have to believe that was all coincidental, accidental, unintended, and that just strains credulity.
For their part, some Republicans seeing it in the context of diplomatic relationship reset, one with national U.S. interests at its heart.
Anybody who thinks that Vladimir Putin is kind of having his way with Donald Trump might need to be institutionalized, because that's clearly the opposite of the facts. Give the man a break. He hasn't even been sworn in yet, and people are expecting him to have a very explicit foreign policy.
Part of that reset becoming clear that this man, Rex Tillerson, is the front runner for Secretary of State. The ExxonMobil boss received the Order of Friendship Medal from Vladimir Putin 3 years ago. So, what will the new order of friendship look like between President Trump and Putin? And what new order in the offing between the president and his intelligence services?
Porrick O'Brien reporting there. A neo-Nazi group is to become the first extreme right-wing organisation in Britain to be banned as a terrorist group. The Home Secretary has announced that an order has been laid in Parliament to prescribe the group national action under the Terrorism Act. The move means that from Friday morning, being a member of or inviting support for the organisation will become a criminal offence.
National Action is a vile group. They promote homophobia, they promote violence and terrorism, and they have no place in this country. That's why I'm taking this action today.
6 people have been arrested on suspicion of preparing an act of terrorism. Properties in Derby, Burton-on-Trent and London were searched after 5 men and 1 woman were held. An army bomb disposal team was called in during a series of raids this morning. Police said that the 6 arrests were linked to international-related terrorism.
The head of the International Monetary Fund has gone on trial in Paris accused of negligence. Christine Lagarde was French finance minister under Nicolas Sarkozy when she approved an out-of-court settlement to business tycoon Bernard Tapie over the disputed sale of the sports company Adidas. It ended up costing French taxpayers more than 400 million euros. She's accused of allowing the misuse of public funds rather than corruption. This she denies. The case has loomed over her since she moved from the French Finance Ministry to the International Monetary Fund in 2011.
News just in, the Communication Workers Union says that post office workers are to stage 5 days of strikes next week in a dispute over jobs, pensions and branch closures. The action will take place at one of the busiest times of year, with people sending their cards and parcels in the week leading up to Christmas. Now, a man has been arrested at South London railway station after another man was stabbed. Eyewitnesses said that the suspect was shouting death to Muslims. Fatima Manji is at Forest Hill Station this evening. Fatima?
Yes, John, alarming scenes playing out here at lunchtime on an overground train coming into the station here. At around 1:20, a man was seen brandishing a knife, marching through the train, apparently shouting phrases like, "Death to Muslims, kill all Muslims, go back to Syria, I want to kill me a Muslim." Another man was then stabbed. The victim is thought to be in his 40s. Now, several eyewitnesses have told us that he was shouting these phrases and that the attacker was a black man who spoke with a London accent. Here is one eyewitness, Richard, who actually came face to face with the attacker.
So as he approaches me, he looks me dead in my eye, stops, and then looks at the woman that sat opposite me. She's wearing a hijab, and he stands in front of me, so now his back's towards me. And I can now see he actually is brandishing a knife. The blade looks about 5-6 inches long, black handle, and he's holding it up to this woman, and he's with his arms by his side, and he's saying, "I don't want me a Muslim woman, I want me a Muslim man." And at that point, he moves on into carriage 2 and keeps on shouting.
Now, it seems several people apparently tried to tackle this attacker after he stabbed someone, but he managed to run out of the station, and he was also seen by eyewitnesses here. Police have arrested a 38-year-old man. It is in the hands of British Transport Police at the moment, who say they are treating it as a serious hate crime, but not terrorism. We did ask them why that was the case, and they said that there's not enough evidence at this stage, but that well could change, and it could be referred to the Met Police. Now, the victim is a man in his 40s. He has serious injuries. He's in a South London hospital, but they are not life-threatening.
Fatima Manji reporting.
Now, when the Conservative government came to power last year, it had a manifesto pledge to halve the disability employment gap. While 80% of the general population is in work, that figure is just 48% for disabled people. But if you have a disability and are looking for work, finding an employer willing to give you a chance is easier said than done. In the latest of our No Go Britain series about the everyday barriers disabled people face, we've sent Zoe Hilton-Webb, a qualified nursery nurse, out and about to meet others who, like her, can't get beyond interview.
I am one of hundreds of thousands of disabled people in the UK that is actively looking for work. You first met me in May this year at a nursery that I volunteer in. Where is it? Yeah? I had attended over 100 interviews. Where is it? And applied for over 200 jobs with no success. It's been 7 months since then, and despite many more applications, I still haven't found an employer willing to give me a job. Disabled people are twice as likely to be unemployed as non-disabled people. I'm on my way to Hull to meet Darryl. Darryl is a university graduate who dreams of buying his own house. But despite 400 job applications, he's getting nowhere. What jobs have you applied for?
So I've applied for basic admin roles, jobs that I'm easily qualified for, and it's just heartbreaking that you know you've done everything that you can. Your friends have got the same qualifications, if not less, but getting these top jobs, and you because of your disability, you're not getting it.
Like me, Darryl finds it difficult to keep motivated.
I've been depressed because of it, because it's like, why was I born like this? And really, I shouldn't be like this. I shouldn't be like questioning my disability. I should be like, society should just accept me for who I am.
Darryl decided to do something a bit different.
I removed disabled completely from my CV. I had moved everything that showed I had a disability off my CV because I was getting rejected for so many jobs. And it was funny, as soon as I moved that, I got interviews for these jobs. Showed me the importance of that word, disabled, and how employees are so scared about it still.
It was interesting to see that he had similar experiences to me, and the same frustration as me. Now I realise that I'm not the only one. I'm travelling to Suffolk to meet Mary. She's profoundly deaf and works with Finn, a hearing dog. Like many disabled people, she suspected that potential employers were writing her off because of her disability. During a recent recruitment experience, she accidentally received an email that confirmed her fears.
An email came to me, which clearly wasn't intended for me, saying that I wouldn't be suitable for the job because of my hearing dog, but they felt obliged to ask me for interview because I fitted all the criteria essential for the job.
It didn't come as much of a surprise when she didn't get the job, but it has a real impact.
I feel very angry and upset. I don't feel that they've given me a chance. They haven't looked past my disability. It really upset me, and you know, I think now, what's the point? You know, if that is the attitude of a disability confident employer, what is the point of applying for a job when I've got a hearing dog?
It may not have worked for Mary in this case, but Disability Confident is a government scheme that encourages employers to take on disabled people. Trouble is, it's voluntary and you don't even need to employ any disabled people to be accredited. I want to try and understand why employers are worried about taking on people like us. So I've come to the Jubilee Sailing Trust. They try to break down the barriers by bringing employers and disabled people together.
If you don't generally come into contact with people with disabilities very often, suddenly you find that you're totally integrated together. You know, you're all sailing the ship together, so you already you have an immediate interaction with people with disabilities. Many perceptions that you have so quickly go away because you're suddenly seeing able-bodied people working alongside people with disabilities.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, just that it was unbelievable watching you climb that mast. I mean, talk about changing perceptions. I have to say my legs were shaking like a leaf and I was seriously impressed you did it.
By law, employers can't discriminate against disabled people. They are meant to make what's called reasonable adjustments to help us do our job. In Canary Wharf, James works for the management consultant Ernst & Young.
If I need to work from home 1, 2, 3 days a week, depending on how I'm feeling, I can do that. I think the biggest thing and the biggest positive about EY is the fact that I can be transparent about my disability.
What advice would you give to me in getting into employment?
Some interviews I ended up leading myself, and before even a question was asked, I would say, I've got a disability. You're probably thinking that I won't be right for this role. I disagree.
Yeah.
These are the things that I've done that mean that I'm good for this role, that I can be part of a diverse team, and that I can bring a different perspective. We can help employers understand what it means to be disabled and what we need in order to be successful.
Can we take them out?
I've come to Gloucester, where the Secret Garden believe their staff should be representative of the whole community, and have taken on Rachel in my dream job as a nursery assistant. What's the reactions from the parents that you're employing disabled people?
They're all really enthusiastic and they all love Rachel. She's such a lovely girl and she just exudes confidence and just loves being at the nursery, so everybody really loves her here.
Why do you think employers struggle to give good jobs to disabled people?
Because I don't think that they know what we can do. People like us, we can do things, we can do it. I mean, like here, my disability doesn't affect me when I'm here. I don't have like any problems.
Yeah. Have you got any advice for me to get into employment?
Don't give up, because you will get there. It is hard. It is hard because I found it hard, and I found that I'm going to feel like giving up, but you will get there. Well done.
Can you give this one to Rachel?
Very positive for everything, and both from the views of the employer and employee was all very positive, very passionate about what they do. It's great that Rachel has found an employer to help her fulfil her dreams, but we need to make sure all employers fulfil their legal obligations not to discriminate against disabled people.
Well, we did ask the government for an interview, but no one was available. In a statement, the Department for Work and Pensions said the number of disabled people in work had increased by almost 600,000 over the past 3 years. But it accepted that much more needed to be done to create equal opportunities and said businesses must, quote, wake up to the huge pool of talent that disabled people can bring to the workforce. Well, with me in the studio is Richard Shakespeare, who's a disability consultant, and joining us from Westminster is Heidi Allen, who's chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Young Disabled People. Heidi Allen first, why do you think it is that so many disabled people appear to be trying so hard to get a job but struggling to land it?
Well, they're no different to any group of people who really want to work. The difficulty is it's so much harder for them to achieve that, and that's where the government has to step in and help. You know, we have made progress, but you know, there's a lot of employers out there who are nervous, who don't want to do the wrong thing or be in breach of kind of disability legislation, so it makes them a little bit frightened and reticent of taking disabled people on. So government has a role to break down those barriers, but we also need the job scene.
OK, a lot of employers also potentially discriminating, right?
I think certainly the employers I talk to, it's not knowingly so. The employers that I spoke to, I had a disability employment fair in my constituency a couple of months ago, actually, where I had dozens and dozens of employers really driven and excited by this opportunity of unleashing this talent, particularly in areas like mine where we've got very high employment, we can't get the skills, but they're just frightened of doing things wrong. So certainly the work we've done on the Select Committee for Work and Pensions, I'm also a member of, we've not seen issues with the employers, it's more around connecting those people looking for work with the right employer. That's where we need to do more work.
There were issues, though, with some of the people looking for work in our film that we just saw. Employers, you know, for example, Darryl removed disability from his CV and he then got interviews. Mary saw an email she shouldn't have seen that said that her employer said she wouldn't be suitable because of her hearing dog. I mean, you do accept that discrimination is a problem.
It is, but there's discrimination and poor employer practice in every walk of life, not just with disabled people. You know, we've seen some real problems with big employers recently taking advantage of really desperate workers on poor, weak contracts. So it's not just the area of disability where this is a problem, but where employers are breaking the law, we absolutely have to find them and shut them down and stop them doing it.
OK, I'll come back to that. But Richard Shakespeare, discrimination is no more of a problem for disabled people than it is for many other people.
I think the problem is that we're all too often keen to blame the employers. And it isn't all down to the employers. There are some fantastic employers out there that have very good programmes to try and create an inclusive environment. And we have some employers that obviously aren't perhaps going as far as they could. They're not perhaps as engaged, or they're not perhaps as willing to look at the pool of talent that is there. But by and large, I think most businesses are. I think we're too keen quite often to blame the employers. They're the easy get out of jail free card. I think the government does have to take some responsibility. There's been an awful lot of nonsensical approaches that they've taken in terms of how they drive employment for people with disabilities and that, you know, what they're going to do as a strategy. I think really their strategy is quite disjointed and they haven't really thought through what they're going to do. They've published their sort of headline grabbing, you know, we're going to put so many people into work, we're going to increase it. And over the last 4 years, the percentage of people in employment with a disability has gone up by around 1% because they're just not logical in their approach.
OK, let me put that to Heidi Allen. The government's just not logical in its approach, so it's not making enough difference to disabled people.
Well, I think they're starting to, and you will know that we've had a recently published green paper from the DWP that outlines, you know, some really transformative changes that the department wants to make. I want to make sure that the detail's right. It has been difficult. Government, as you will know, is a typical big oil tanker, and getting different government departments to work together is hard, but that's not an excuse. We need to do better at that. And I think we have a new ministerial team in Penny Mordaunt who is absolutely committed to this agenda.
Okay.
Let's see what the green paper comes up. You know, every disabled charity in the country is being invited to participate in this.
Right.
So this is the biggest conversation I think we've ever had between government and the disabled community, and we need to grab it with both hands, and we could make a really transformative success of it.
Richard Shakespeare, grab it with both hands now. What would you say that the government needs to do?
I think what they need to do is almost go back to basics and actually look at the approach that they're taking, who's going to take control of it and who they listen to in terms of where they get their advice and their resources. Because the Green Paper, fantastic, but the challenge now is to actually turn what's in the Green Paper and in the manifestos and what the government says into a reality. And my concern is that if we continue along the same vein that the government and then the current sort of process seems to be, is that we'll be sitting here in 20 years' time and we won't have made any progress.
I mean, Heidi Allen, you talked about the government intervening to stop employers discriminating. But would you like to see, for example, quotas or firms being named and shamed? What action would you like?
It's funny because it's a question, that we talk about a lot as we're trying to find our way through this. Should we have quotas? Employers have to employ so many disabled people, or tax breaks, and that just morally doesn't feel right to me. Employers need to employ disabled people because they have great skills and show incredible levels of loyalty and determination and resilience. So that's what I want employers to focus on. I'm not really comfortable with the idea of quotas, but I think government's role has to be about identifying those who are breaking the law from a discrimination point of view, but also helping employers not be scared of taking disabled people on. Access to work, is a great programme that the government runs, but so few people know about it.
Okay.
So they're the kind of things where the government needs to take more action.
OK, Heidi Allen, Richard Shakespeare, I'm sorry we've run out of time, but thank you both very much for joining us. John.
After the break, they're the people whose very future in Britain hangs in the balance. We meet the Italian and Spanish members of the National Dance Company of Wales, who want to know what Brexit means for their right to stay here. Within the last few minutes, Russian news channels have reported that the Syrian government has declared victory for President Assad's forces in East Aleppo. It says the troops have been firing into the air in celebration. This comes as a war monitoring group has claimed that 60 people were killed when the Syrian army stormed a rebel-held area. Now, should the government here promise to safeguard the rights of EU citizens living in Britain before it begins Brexit negotiations? Until now, ministers have avoided giving such a commitment until they can be sure of reciprocal arrangements for Britons living elsewhere in the EU. But a new report says that up to 3 million Europeans already living here should be given automatic right to stay. Our correspondent Andy Davis has been meeting some of those in South Wales who feel they are stuck in limbo.
In Cardiff's Millennium Centre this afternoon, the National Dance Company Wales quietly rehearses a new creation.
Release.
Half of their dancers, like Angela from Catalonia, are originally from outside the UK, from France, Holland, Portugal and Italy. And like many of the other almost 3 million EU nationals currently living in the UK, their future status here remains unclear. Might Brexit mean exit?
I would like to have the freedom to choose.
What about you, Matteo? Do you want to stay here?
Yeah, I'd love to stay here. And but yeah, as Angie said, it would be a shame that someone else will decide for me. You'll need to change your life.
Today, campaigners tried to deliver a letter to Downing Street, calling upon the Prime Minister to guarantee the existing rights of all EU nationals currently in Britain. Just as the think tank British Future published their report, overseen by a former Leave advocate, calling for the same.
People have a right to expect to manage and plan their lives ahead. So the sooner we can agree with this with our European colleagues, the better. And I think it'd be a good way of opening the negotiations for our Prime Minister to make an offer to the rest of the European countries and say, this is what we're doing with EU citizens here, and I trust that you will do the same for UK citizens in your country.
They also look, in this report, at the question of when such guarantees should end. In other words, what should be the cut-off point after which any EU national coming into the UK would have to encounter a different set of rules regarding residency status. Their proposal, the moment Article 50 is triggered and the exit negotiations begin. A few miles from Cardiff, in Caerphilly, where the Brexit vote was strong, most, but not all, agreed that those EU citizens who've already moved here should be allowed to stay.
They come here, they work here, they work here, they brought their children here. Why shouldn't they stay?
No, they shouldn't. I think it's absolutely appalling because none of us got jobs over here and the government are letting them in as much as they want to.
So what about those already here? What do you think should happen to them?
Well, I think they should go back.
Should they be allowed to stay?
Yeah, they should, yeah.
Why do you think that?
Because we got people in their countries and we want them to stay there, don't we? So, well, they do anyway.
The very point the government likes to make when it says it can't yet commit to our EU migrants until other European member states reciprocate for their British immigrants.
What would it mean to you if the government came out and said, right, EU citizens who are currently here in the UK will have the right to remain? What would that mean to you if they said that?
Then I would have faith that maybe this referendum seemed something super shocking, but actually it would move in a way that could be good for everyone in a way like this.
Yeah. They want some certainty, and so does the company which hired them. No doubt countless other employers around the country too. The meaning of Brexit on this issue open to interpretation for the time being.
Andy Davis reporting. Just a reminder of that breaking news tonight. Reports of Syrian army celebrations celebrating the fall of the rebel-held East Aleppo. And just if you're thinking about Syria, just remember that disabled person, Zoe Hilton Webb, reporting there, standing high on the top of the mast of a tall ship. That's it.
That's all. Good evening.
That's Channel 4 News. Good evening.